Elite Facts presents
10 chilling experiences during sleep paralysis.
10.
The black cat. This is one feline you definitely don't want to share a room with. Said to have been witnessed by many sleep paralysis sufferers, this creepy black shadow-like cat has reportedly appeared many times throughout the night. Those visited by the aptly named black cat recall waking up and seeing the creature just sitting there on their chest. But what soon follows is a terrifying feeling of both pain and breathlessness. Some witnesses also state that they have seen the cat shapeshift, whether it be into a more unusual creature or even a demon figure. Being suffocated by a cat is often brushed off as being just an urban legend, but for black cat victims, it's very real.
9.
Turn off the lights. This experience comes to us from a student who fell asleep while reading a book before bed. Seems natural to expect, right? But what he didn't expect was to experience the dreaded sleep paralysis that followed. The last thing the student recalls was slowly falling asleep with the background noise of a television coming from downstairs and the book in his hand. When he came to, there seemed to be nothing unusual about the situation. His lamp was still on and the book was now laying on his chest, but the entire room had suddenly grown bitterly cold. As the air in the room became colder, he had a sudden feeling that someone was watching him. He knew the room was empty, but upon trying to look around, he realized that he couldn't move. His hands became as heavy as boulders, impossible to move, along with his legs, which at the time might as well have belonged to a mannequin. It was in that moment of complete paralysis that he felt the presence of someone he couldn't see in the room with him. The bedside lamp suddenly turned off with a quick click, and out of the darkness he witnessed a shadowy figure of an old man drifting towards him. No eyes were present, just dark, empty sockets with blood pouring out of them. Without reasoning, the old man became enraged, shouting and grabbing at the man's legs. You can only imagine how terrifying this must have been, especially considering that the student could not move at all. Unsure how and when he awoke, the student realized that the old man had been his deceased grandfather. Quite a chilling end to a dark story.
8.
The Devil's Phone Call. If anyone is familiar with the 2015 sleep paralysis documentary, The Nightmare, you may recognize this story. This one is a little different. Instead of being paralyzed, the victim believes he has woken up from whatever dream he was having to answer a telephone. Once he starts his walk to the lounge, or wherever the phone may be, he finds himself talking to an unknown voice, and this voice is asking for one thing and one thing only: to be let in. Of course, when the victim says no, things start to get rather scary and out of control. The room begins to rumble and shake. The voice turns deeper and angrier, and the victim simply can't move. Scared out of his mind, the man decides to turn to Jesus for help, and then suddenly, as if nothing had happened, snaps right out of it and is back in his bed.
7.
The Visions of Nicholas Bruno. Since being a teenager, photographer Nicholas Bruno has experienced several chilling sleep paralysis experiences, and for most of his life, the way most people do, he simply dealt with it. He ignored everything that occurred and hoped it would eventually just stop. But Nicholas Bruno's recurring nightmares came thick and fast, night after night, until it dawned on him to start a sleep paralysis journal and document what he was witnessing in these nightmares. These nightly encounters range from the surreal to the terrifying. He recalls one incident involving faceless silhouetted figures, embraces from shadow-like hands, and a warping of reality surrounding him, all while completely paralyzed. These could be noted as basic descriptions of a phenomenon that millions of people across the world experience on a regular basis, but Bruno wanted to take the imagery further than just a simple description. So began his journey to recreate his experiences through photography. Just like the experiences and nightmares themselves, the photographs range from bizarre to downright horrific. But Bruno manages to beautifully capture the helplessness and isolation one would feel during sleep paralysis.
6.
Gremlins. The word gremlin probably makes us all think of the classic 1980s movie, the cute-looking gizmo and the rule of no feeding after midnight. Unfortunately, this gremlin encounter isn't nearly as much fun to watch. The encounter starts with what looks like a small green creature hiding in the shadows. Seems harmless, right? Wrong. The encounter doesn't end until you wake up screaming over and over again. One victim of this monster describes it as a, quote, browny green color, gremlin-type creature with pointed features. She then points out that it looks vaguely familiar to the creature found in a painting titled The Nightmare. During these chilling encounters, the gremlin would sit on her chest and whisper in an unknown language. But that's not all. She recalls waking one night to see the gremlin crouching on the ceiling. As she turned to get a better look at it, the creature swiveled its head, looked right back at her, and smiled. Another time it was behind her, again whispering in an unknown language, and she remembers waking up as she felt its tongue in her ear. Most of us, if put in this situation, would no doubt chalk the experience up to something supernatural, but she seems to understand that it's all in her head, no matter how terrifying it feels.
5.
The creature in the attic. What is it about an attic that makes them so creepy? The darkness, the confined space, your parents' old photo albums? Or maybe it's because there's always that feeling that something terrible is lurking up there. Well, along with the darkness and the confined space, this one unfortunate soul had the horrifying vision of seeing something or someone, very sinister looking, creeping out from the roof above them. Waking up in the middle of the night, they noticed that the attic happened to be half open. As if that wouldn't freak you out enough, ready to investigate, they tried getting up, only to realize that they couldn't move. Panic-stricken and paralyzed, they witnessed the rest of the attic door open up and a dark figure begin to crawl out and attempt to reach the victims in their bed. Imagine not being able to move or even cry for help while this is happening. Just having no choice but to wait and see what happens next. No thanks. Once the figure got closer to the victim, the clawed shadow creature desperately tried to reach out and grab them, ready to pull them into the abyss of the dark attic.
4.
The skeleton. The man involved in this story recalls how he experienced sleep paralysis for at least 18 months, usually having the most common experience involving a group of shadowy figures standing around his bed. But then, two noticeably different experiences stood out from the rest. The first began like the typical paralysis story, but rapidly switched to a nightmare of hellish proportions. He was lying on his side, facing away from the bedroom door, covered over by his sheets, when suddenly he felt the sheets move, like somebody was lifting them up. Think paranormal activity, but scarier. Then something very unexpected happened. He felt something crawl into bed behind him. At the time, he couldn't turn to identify what it was, but whatever it was, it decided to slide its arm around his waist and breathe down his neck. He described the feeling as being, quote, cuddled by a skeleton with claws. His body totally unresponsive, he could only lie there while the so-called skeleton slowly breathed behind him. As if this moment weren't scary enough, it finally whispered to him, quote,
"Not yet. You're not ready yet. I'll come back when you are."
And then left. The second story is more of an uplifting experience, which seems quite rare when it comes to sleep paralysis. Feeling the usual signs of sleep paralysis, he expected to see some kind of monster, but what he actually witnessed was a kind-looking old man kneeling beside his bed. The man was silent, then simply looked at him and smiled.
3.
The Shadow Man. The Shadow Man seems to be quite a regular visitor to the victims of sleep paralysis, but only exists to those who see it. However, one man managed to capture the Shadow Man on video. You're probably wondering, how can you possibly film something that only exists in your mind? Well, the short and sweet answer would simply be, you can't. But we all know that's never stopped anyone from making a creepy video, and it certainly didn't stop a man by the name of Mike Pike. Mike says that he's frequently been a victim of sleep paralysis, and it tends to revolve around the same scenario. Lying in bed at night, Mike was half asleep until he got the sinking feeling that there was someone else in the room with him. Unable to move, Mike noticed the dark, shadowy figure looming over the foot of his bed. This happened several times. So, terrified by the continuous vision, Mike took it upon himself to set up a video camera one night. Not believing he would actually capture anything, this was more of an experiment to convince himself that it was all in his head. What he captured on video that night, well, it didn't help. As morning came, Mike took the camera to view his recording, and when he looked at the footage, which can actually be viewed online, he found that the shadowy figure was still looming over him. Mike has made it clear that the video terrified him so much that he can no longer sleep in his room.
2.
The Hat Man, a very similar figure to the aforementioned Shadow Man. Some victims have described him simply as the terrifying man in a hat. This is, again, a sighting that has been experienced by multiple sufferers. The Hat Man has been described by several people as a ringleader of sorts, who only appears after being plagued by one or two of his shadow men. Universally, this appears to be a shadowy figure in a classic fedora hat standing behind other, more standard-looking shadow men. The Hat Man continues to stand, silent, with a blurred, shadowed face, and looks as if he is menacingly staring down the victim. There are some people who have experienced this that recall the Hat Man just standing there, watching them. But for some unlucky souls out there, he's become physical, and he has been known to strangle or even hit his victims.
1.
The Red Room. The online community is rife with storytellers, conspiracy theorists, and, of course, a ton of forums in which people can discuss, well, pretty much anything. In 2014, a user known only as Watchtower Wolf responded to a sleep paralysis forum post involving a story that was both chilling and horrifying. The post described an experience that he often has with the condition. He made it clear in the post that he understands exactly what's happening and usually manages to get himself out of the situation before anything serious happens, but doesn't always get so lucky. The experience, like many others on this list, starts out with a shadowy figure. Sounds like a pretty regular vision, but wait, there's more. The figure begins to slowly climb the wall beside his bed, and the air fills with the noise of what can only be described as TV static. When the static kicks in, the shadowy figure begins to morph into a tall, freakishly thin man with no face. We can only assume it looks something like the Slender Man. Although it has no actual face, it does appear to have little balls of television static where its eyes should be. The static-eyed man gets closer and closer, and with every step, the static volume increases. The man comes face to face, or face to no face, with Watchtower Wolf. Raising his hands, the Shadow Man grabs the sides of his head, looks into the victim's eyes, and screams into his face. As soon as the scream is let out, the whole room turns red, and the man's arms suddenly shape into spikes. As if to taunt the victim, he rubs the spikes over his face and neck, then, without warning, stabs one of them into the victim's throat, and the victim wakes up.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more Elite Facts.